Hey everyone, welcome to Dirk Island. This is the weekend show where we talk about documentaries we've watched. Apologies for the sunglasses, my eye's a bit swollen, but
I'm wearing them in solidarity.
Anyway, we're going for it anyway. So this week we are talking about the Netflix documentary called Abducted in Plain Sight.
I mean, wow, what a wild story, just in terms of it's an abduction story with a really bizarre psychological element in terms of so it's a neighbor, someone who's trusted, someone who's very charismatic, and there's some real, spoilers, but some real bombs that are dropped as we get our way in that make this not just a typical abduction story. It's a neighbor who has a personal relationship with both of the parents, kind of picks a favorite daughter, and eventually after, even willingly, the parents allow him to take her out somewhere and they just don't come back. And he invents this wild, using a tape recorder and talking to her with a voice alteration, poses as aliens.
Yeah,
and
to a very young girl. I forget what age she was when this whole relationship started, but like maybe even 10-year-old, maybe younger, a very young and impressionable girl who actually believes, this story.
And very, I think were they really religious as well.
Very religious,
They're kind of a Mormon community.
Yeah, to explain, I mean, it's worth watching for these reasons, but you should, kind of over a tape recorder puts her, kind of probably drugs her, puts her in a car while they're on some sort of condoned road trip by the parents, which is a whole different set of the story. But and then she wakes up with a tape recorder saying, "We are these aliens, and you have to do these missions for us." And then she believes it, and
one of the missions is you need to make a child with a man who's in another room. And so she walks out terrified. She's as scared as you would be as a kid being abducted by aliens. Now she's got this mission to have reproduce with this man in the other room. She goes to the other room, and it's the man who's abducted her passing out. And I mean, it's so amazing because, or I could just imagine if I was that age, I'd have no capacity to understand otherwise. And in fact, you would want to believe. I mean, imagine if you're so scared you've been abducted by aliens, what you would crave is to see someone you know and relate to. And basically now she is telling her pedophilic abductor, here's what we have to do. We have to have sex. And he manipulates her in a way where his own victim is explaining the abuse that now they need to do.
Yeah.
And so it's a real mindfuck situation.
Yeah. And they basically tell her all the things that someone who's, and it's over a long process, obviously, like a lot of these, grooming scenarios happen, but where they, she kind of is. There's an element of you can't tell anyone because then we're gonna kill your sister or whatever. It's just so much there that just completely screws up the child, and is one of these things where you realize that it's an Abducted in Plain Sight is a great title for the documentary because it's a bit of this, it's like a child abduction for some perverted person, but the way it's done is very creepy and unique. It's a really interesting documentary. I mean, I don't know. I'm not familiar with a story like it. It obviously has elements of many of these kind of creepy child abduction stories. I mean, I watched this one recently on the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, and you almost, it's in the same genre but totally different in a way. And this one is obviously tells a story. And yeah, really, really interesting. I'm very glad that I watched it. I'm sort of surprised by how interesting it is. And I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people have the same reaction. Just very interesting. I don't know why I watched this, but yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah.
So, so the question we always kind of ask is, if you were to say why does this document matter? Why does the subject matter matter? What do you have? What do you think about this document as it fits into kind of the world?
Yeah, it's an interesting question on this one because I did really like it and find it an interesting just story with a lot of weird quirks in it. I don't know if it's like a super matters a ton documentary for me. I just thought it was interesting, compelling story, but maybe you have a better answer. But to me, it's pretty low on the like societal impact or relevance level. It's not that type of documentary for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this one a lot because it is kind of a weird documentary. So I think the thing that's really difficult to understand, and this is a bit more of a, kind of revealing parts of the story, but the parents are complicit in this story, and the parents are complicit because because they basically allow this man to continue to be able to get close to their child, and when they have a valid kidnapping case against him, basically for kidnapping their child, because he does take him without their consent at one point, they are pressured into recanting their statements, and the reason why is because this man who grooms their daughter into a relationship with him also grooms the wife into having a relationship with him, which in retrospect seems like completely manipulative and not actually legitimate, but does convince the wife to cheat on her husband with him and have a series of affair relationships over time. And wilder than can be imagined, also convinces the husband to have a secret gay affair with the abductor. And ultimately, when and this is why I would say it matters, ultimately when they could have intervened for their child, they were already in too deep, because the threat that seemed to work to get them to not go to the authorities and ultimately protect their child was, we're going to tell on your husband, tell him how he had a gay relationship with this guy. And that is the saddest part of watching this, I think. And I don't want to say, I think everyone's very remorseful for what happened. The family's interviewed, and it is certainly very, I don't want to say, be too critical on them, because I think they dealt with a lot, and they were basically just all manipulated by a man who was playing them off all against each other. But I think it is sad and says a little bit about the time where these parents, even though they were all convinced the thing that was used as leverage against them was a revelation that potentially one man did a gay thing with another man, and that would be such a horrible revelation that you could be extorted by it, that you could be extorted to not continue with your claim of kidnapping against a child predator, or continue with, or to really effectively protect your child, because the embarrassment of any sort of a gay thing that might have happened was, at least in that community at that time, so high. So I think that's at least a little bit historically relevant. Perhaps at least it shows you a bit of a world that is hard to understand, but for whatever reason, and very sad ultimately, that an allegation of a gay relationship outside of a marriage by a single guy could be used as leverage so effectively against someone to not, effectively protect the child in this case. So that's the thing that I think is the most meaningful, or maybe matters the most about, watching something like this, is it shows you something. That's the thing that I hadn't seen before, at least.
Yeah, it was. I mean, this is really, I'm not meaning this to be so cynical or judgmental, but the one thing I did notice, not religious person, I noticed how they were Mormons, and he was kind of part of their community, which was also Ted Bundy was involved.
Were they Mormons? I don't even remember. Okay.
Yeah. I'll fact check myself after this, but I just thought there was this underlying sense of, it's not so bad, this underlying sense of like trustworthiness and maybe a little naiveness, that made me think maybe this is an impressionable group.
Yeah, as if the group was really exclusive.
Which I hate myself for saying that. Like, I'm really not wanting to critique some family that's been, but that did occur to me. It is tough, how bad, and they're trapped by, it just more goes into what you're saying, is they're a little impressionable, they're a little, more likely to believe in stories that other people might have their flags raised of skepticism. And then when something like the dad has sex with another man, that trumps kidnapping in their eyes. Like, that trumps pursuing a kidnapping charge.
Yeah, and I mean, even realistically, I think that the allegation of how the gay relationship happened, in this movie is interesting to think about in and of itself, because he basically says that he was convinced to give the other guy a hand job because the guy just suggested that he needed one. And which is, just to be frank about it, I mean, now we're talking about the specifics of the documentary as opposed to like the general level of it. But let's just get on to the next question, is what's the most interesting part? I think this is also one of the most interesting parts, because for me, I think that this to me is like, it strains credibility even though you're admitting to something. Because although I think it was very difficult for them to admit in the form of this document all the things that happened that made them ultimately were used against them as manipulation by this predator. The idea that the dad just basically was convinced to give him a hand job because he said basically, I need relief, or whatever the story was, is one of those when you have a person, and I don't want it to sound bad because I do feel bad for everyone in this family, but when you have a person who admits to you, like, well, I did that, but I didn't do that. Like, they're like comfortable
admitting. I gave him a hand job as a friend.
No, they're comfortable admitting a little bit, but it's like almost as a red herring for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's exactly the way that it.
Well, what do you mean by that when you're talking? Are you meaning he's telling the story of?
I mean, I couldn't tell if he, like the wife, had a 6-month full-on relationship with the man, and he was only comfortable admitting a single instance that appears to him to be almost like just trying to help a guy out. Because then the leverage, I mean, if true, then the leverage over the weird little allegation that he gave a guy a hand job seems like even more incredible that was leverage. But also, because we're always looking, I mean, I think, the play of credibility in documentaries is always one of the most fun parts. And for me here, even when we're talking about very horrific things, I always think it's very interesting what people are willing to admit to, especially when they're very embarrassing. Because, let's be real, it's very difficult to admit anything embarrassing. It's very difficult to admit, well, I really fucked that up. Why did I fuck that up? Well, because I'm an idiot, or because I wasn't paying any attention at all. You want to be like, well, I thought, but it wasn't that. I don't want to admit to the worst. It's like, it's embarrassing. I get it, but it is always interesting to see, even with very traumatic things that people are willing to admit to, what they're willing to admit to, and then when the story is, I gave a man a hand job because he asked for relief.
Like, not
and
because
a straight
I'm attracted to men.
Not because I'm attracted to men, or not because I had a real relationship with him, is interesting because it's maybe like, because you can't really heal. It's like it's hard to. I don't know. It's just very interesting, very memorable part, because I don't know what to think about it. I guess is the ultimate thing. I just don't know what to think about it, and not to say that he has to be gay or not, or whether it's like, obviously a single act does not make someone anything. It's just unless they believe that's what it makes them, But yeah, the allegations of the story, the things that made them complicit, were also a bit fascinating, because when you think about, that was used against you as leverage, that was the thing that was would be horrible, would ruin you if it came out. You wonder if there was more there, obviously, because it was used very effectively as leverage.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. The most striking part of the whole documentary was just this revelation that after you have this kidnapping story, that the parents were targeted and manipulated just as much as the little girl who was taken herself. I mean, it's really interesting, and it's just a major twist that stuck with me.
Okay, welcome back to Dirk Island. This segment is worth watching. Apologies again for the sunglasses if you're watching us on the video. My eye's a bit swollen.
And I'm wearing it for solidarity's sake.
Anyway, so we're talking about Abducted in Plain Sight, the documentary on Netflix about a very wild story of child abduction. So what'd you think? What are you going to say? Worth watching?
I am going to give it a solid 6. Maybe worth watching, maybe worth it. It's really entertaining. I mean, not a critique of the documentary itself. I think the reason that this is getting a 6 for me is because doesn't have that major feeling of relevance to greater society or human nature to me. And the way it hit me, it didn't stick with me. I didn't keep mulling it over in my mind a bunch after, but still a really good watch. And I know for some that I've talked to, like, great story itself. If you're into this type of if an Abducted in Plain Sight catches you at the title, you're probably going to like it. If not, you could skip it.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say I have a slightly higher rating. Probably worth watching. Now, I actually feel like I was even torn maybe a little bit more because I really liked watching it. And I've talked to a lot of people and they really liked watching it. So I think that if you do watch documentaries occasionally, I think then you'd be like, you're almost definitely going to like it, like if it's worth watching. But the reason that our scale really only starts for non-documentary people, only documentaries that transcend the genre are we really giving 9s and 10s. So 8 for us in the, if you like documentaries, is the top. And this is like, it's very worth watching, I think. But because we're talking about a lot of people and maybe this isn't your type genre, then we're going to say probably. So if you like documentaries, if you like these kind of bizarre true crime stories, this definitely has different elements to it that you won't see in other documentaries and will be fascinating, really engaging, and is consumable, and I bet it's only an hour and a half. So if you've got some time on a Saturday or a weeknight or whatever and you're on Netflix, I would say probably worth watching. Anyway, thanks very much for being with us. Hope you enjoy. If you want to keep up with us, please subscribe on YouTube, or you can download our podcast weekly on Apple Podcasts. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks.